Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Judy and I love travel, history, geography, and learning how these three things affect people's lives. Today we're visiting Nantes, the capital of the Pays de la Loire administrative region. It straddles the Loire River about 30 miles inland from the Atlantic coast. It was once the most important city of the region. It isn't exactly part of the famous Loire Valley, home of all those chateaus, and it's no longer part of ancient Brittany, of which it was long the capital. Nantes is a case study of how perspectives change over time and places evolve to meet those changes. It's old, it's new. It complains about the past, and yet it forges ahead into the 21st century. For a traveler who wants to go a little bit further than just the glittering external must-sees, and there are quite a few of them here, it's a great place to dig a bit deeper. Run away from home to walk about and talk about Nantes with me, the armchair traveler, today as your guide. Nantes is situated on France's Atlantic coast, straddling the Loire River, and sits about 30 miles inland from the sea. The city's history spans nearly 2,000 years, with remnants of Roman settlements still visible today, including parts of the original city wall, which have been integrated into the castle and the cathedral. To understand why Nantes identifies more with Brittany than its current administrative region, you need to dig into both the Roman history of Gaul and modern French administrative structure. It's a little complicated, but stick with me here. During the Roman era, the Loire River served as a natural boundary separating the vast province of Aquitania, highlighted in red on this old map, from Armorica, which lies directly to the north and corresponds more or less with present-day Brittany. The Roman city of Portus Nomentum was mostly located on the north side of the river. Although Nantes was a significant city in Roman Gaul, it never held the title of capital for any province. People, of course, lived on both sides of the river and shared the same language and culture. I've marked the present location of Nantes with a blue arrow on this map. Nantes has always been the Loire Valley's gateway to the world, first as a trading port and later just as a trading depot. After the fall of Rome, it continued to thrive as a trading hub. In the 17th century, Nantes found a new and troubling product to buy, sell, and profit from: human beings. The city profited significantly and handsomely from the slave trade. Enslaved people didn't actually physically pass through Nantes, but the business transactions and trading all occurred here. This separation, which acted as a kind of out of sight, out of mind idea, allowed traders to maintain the illusion that their hands were clean. Like many involved in the transatlantic slave trade during the 17th and 18th century, the Nantes slave traders often viewed enslaved Africans primarily as commodities rather than as human beings with any kind of rights or dignity. This dehumanization served as a justification for the brutal practices of slavery and the slave trade. Some local individuals probably recognized the humanity of the enslaved people, but the dominant attitudes of the time were shaped by economic interests, racial theories, and social hierarchies that all deemed Africans as inferior and subhuman. The leap from viewing them as inferior to seeing them as subhuman, essentially as animals deserving inhumane treatment, was alarmingly small. Over roughly 1 century, ships leaving Nantes sailed to Africa and collected and carried off more than 500,000 Africans to slavery in France's Caribbean colonies. Nantes equipped 1,744 slave voyages. The French actually keep records of things like this. A bit less than half of all the expeditions. Their forced labor was the backbone of France's colonial economy until the final abolition of slavery in 1848. In Nantes, which emerged as a major port for the slave trade, the economic gains from this trade were prioritized over any ethical or humanitarian considerations. The legacy of this had lasting effects on society and remains a touchy topic for reflection and discussion even today. Slavery is a tough topic to deal with, and I have to credit the people of Nantes for facing up to that part in that filthy business. Since the end of the 20th century, the city has started confronting the chapters of its past, and in 2012 unveiled this somber and austere memorial to what they had done before. Over time, Nantes has demonstrated its ability to remake itself as times changed and necessity emerged. When Roman power faded, it became the home and capital of a new duchy. For a time, it became, arguably, the slave capital of France. And when slavery was abolished, it transformed itself into an industrial hub with a shipyard, here at Saint-Nazaire. Later on, we'll see how, with the deindustrialization of the region in the 1970s and 1980s, the city again fell upon hard times and has reimagined itself rather successfully as a burgeoning tech and arts capital, a status it maintains to this day. The 19th century was transformative for Saint-Nazaire as it evolved from basically a sleepy fishing port to become a major center for shipbuilding and heavy industry, which it remains to this day. This change was largely driven by the establishment of shipyards, particularly one called Chantier d'Atlantique in 1861, which positioned the city as one of France's leading shipbuilding hubs, turning out cruise ships, ferries, research vessels, and more. The yard is no longer solely French-owned. It underwent a spell of near bankruptcy, and now an Italian shipbuilding company based in Trieste holds a 50% stake. During World War II, Saint-Nazaire was a strategic prize, along with all the other French Atlantic ports. The city was occupied fairly early on by German forces, and its shipyards were repurposed for military production. The Germans heavily garrisoned both the city and the port. In 1942, Allied forces bombed the city extensively, causing significant damage. As I mentioned during our visit to Toulon, the Allies were in desperate need of additional port facilities after the Normandy landings. Even so, in 1944, they chose to bypass Saint-Nazaire, despite its World War II service to the Allies and its being well known on the military and naval side. During World War I, Saint-Nazaire served as a major debarkation point for American troops heading to Europe. After the United States entered the war in 1917, it became a critical entry point for the American Expeditionary Forces as they arrived in France. The port handled men, military equipment, supplies, and resources, all necessary for the war effort. The infrastructure was expanded and improved to accommodate the increased levels of traffic. The shipyards were also involved in building and repairing war vessels. These included cargo ships and naval vessels that were essential for transporting troops and supplies across the Atlantic. You might be wondering why the Allies bypassed Saint-Nazaire, which seemed pretty handy during World War II. There was a really good reason. After D-Day, the German High Command redesignated Saint-Nazaire as a Festung, or fortress, and ordered it to hold out to the last man and at all costs. American commanders weighed the pros and cons of the port, which was somewhat out of the way of Allied movements from Normandy, or north and east from the Mediterranean, and decided capturing it literally wouldn't be worth the cost in men, material, and time. Instead of a direct attack, the Allies laid siege to the city from August 1944 onward. The German garrison held out until May 11, 1945, 5 full days after Germany's unconditional surrender, making it one of the last places in Europe to fall. After the war, the French faced the daunting task of cleanup and rebuilding, including cleaning up some of the Nazi additions. During the war, the Germans established an enormous submarine base here, a concrete bunker nearly 900 meters long, and it was virtually bomb-proof, designed to house and repair U-boats for the Atlantic operations. The base played a crucial role in the German naval campaign against Allied shipping. After the war, it could not be demolished because of its size. Today, it's been repurposed as a public space, featuring museums, a historic submarine, and various exhibitions. Two gorgeous buildings are the antique anchors of this city. This is the Ducal Castle. There have been fortifications on this spot since before the 13th century, and those were built on top of a Gallo-Roman city wall. That building was demolished in the 15th century to make way for the castle we see today. When medieval builders wanted a defensible stronghold, they frequently reused Roman sites. The Romans picked the best places. They also built for the ages, so frequently original walls, buildings, and building materials, pried out of the remains of walls and buildings and even from paved roads, were incorporated into the new designs. The chateau or fort was built on an island facing the river, with water diverted around the river into a protective moat. The moat wasn't just for eels, or more recently swans, when it was a wet moat, or flowers when it was a dry moat. It had drawbridges, portcullises, towers, and arrow slits for defense. From the outside, the castle looks quite plain, with a sentry walk about 500 yards long, punctuated by 7 towers set into the walls. Duke Francois II, the last Duke of Brittany, built this urban stronghold to defend his duchy, which was always under threat from the Kingdom of France. Francois turned out to be the last of the dukes, and his daughter, who eventually married first a Habsburg king, then 2 French kings in succession, was the last duchess. After that, Brittany disappeared as an independent entity. Francois and Anne's dreams of preserving and defending the independent duchy folded, but it did so a little bit at a time. Their castle, gradually modernized, lived on. If you're curious about Anne and Francois, check out my full blog post on them. The link is in the description box below. Castles evolve over time, adapting to changes in warfare and the needs of their inhabitants. Modifications can enhance comfort, impress visitors, or align with modern tastes. When castles aren't updated, they can be abandoned, demolished, or just left to decay. A prime example of the latter is Chinon, which we'll explore later in our tour of the valley. This castle was never left behind as outdated. It was continually modified to meet changing requirements of the duchy and the inhabitants. Typically, castles start out with a heavily fortified tower, serving as a last refuge for the defenders inside the walls. The standalone tower you see here likely dates back to the 14th century and is the only visible remnant of that original structure. Defensive upgrades intensified under Francois II, the last duke, who fortified the duchy against Louis XI's ambitions. He added gates and towers to strengthen his defenses. However, he also wanted a residence that reflected his wealth, power, and prestige, so he commissioned an architect named Mathurin Rodier to create a grand ducal residence, leading to the construction of the Grand Logis and the Grand Gouvernement, a palace within the fortress. When the duke died in 1488, the work was unfinished, but his daughter Anne, whom we met previously, continued the project after her second marriage, introducing Renaissance elements into the decorative mix. Anne's influence is evident in the early Renaissance decor, which would later be championed and promoted by her son-in-law, King Francois I of France. The castle served as a residence for the French kings visiting Brittany and had various uses, including a military barracks, arsenal, even a prison. Over the centuries, it underwent numerous transformations and suffered damage from fires and an explosion in 1800. During World War II, the castle became the headquarters for the German commanders, including General Otto von Stülpnagel, who fortified it and built a bunker in the courtyard. When the French government rebuilt the castle after World War II, they retained one of Stülpnagel's pillboxes as a reminder of what had happened. This was undoubtedly far more comfortable for him than, say, camping out in a tent. The castle sustained significant damage from bombings in 1943, but restoration efforts began following the war. Today, the Castle of the Dukes of Brittany stands as a prominent historical site and a museum, celebrating the rich history of Brittany and its dukes. When we move, we might change the address label on our apartment or postbox, or add an identifying touch to the outside of our homes. The people who lived here and later used the castle as a vacation getaway were no different. The dukes left their motto and coat of arms on the walls, shown here on the left. The French kings eventually left their motto and coat of arms, installed by Louis XIV, on the right. The Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul is located just north of the chateau, along a wide street and almost certainly on or near the site of the Roman-era Forum. Construction on this building began in 1434, on the site of a Romanesque cathedral. It took an impressive 457 years to complete, only finishing in 1891. The cathedral has endured mostly due to its sturdy construction, but it has had to face a lot over its lifetime. During the Reformation, large sections of its beautiful fresco walls were defaced, leading church fathers and authorities to just cover up the remains with plaster. As far as I know, before the most recent fire, researchers were still looking for more examples underneath the plaster sheathing, hoping to find something that had been left and not chiseled out. The French Revolution began in 1789 and brought anti-clerical sentiment and the nationalization of church property. In 1793, Nantes was a revolutionary hub, and the cathedral was repurposed as a temple of wisdom, hosting various ceremonies that led to the destruction of many religious symbols inside. It also suffered physical damage, including a notable fire in 1793 that caused quite a bit of destruction, which was gradually repaired. During World War II, Allied bombing damaged the cathedral. Restoration efforts began, and by 1970, my first visit here, structural repairs were complete, although some work remained. The interior was somewhat dark and grimy. The tomb of Francois II, the last duke, and his second wife, Marguerite of Foix, was on display, but it still felt quite gloomy. The area needed a lot more lighting and a good thorough cleaning, but post-World War II France had bigger fish to fry. I don't believe they had the job done when, in 1972, a massive fire broke out on the roof, likely caused by a workman's blowtorch. Firefighters controlled the blaze, but the timber frame roofing was severely damaged and interior marble became even more highly soiled. This incident finally forced a complete restoration, which was finished in the early 2000s. On my second visit, I actually did not recognize the place. The interior was bright and shiny, and the walls, glass, and tombs were on full and glorious display. Unfortunately, that didn't last. In July of 2020, the cathedral was hit with yet another fire, actually 3 separate blazes, one destroying the main organ, built in 1621. The fires must have been arson. You don't get 3 separate fires in 3 separate places from an accident. And around 100 firefighters were required to knock down the flames. The cathedral is still undergoing rehabilitation and is now expected to reopen to the public in September of 2025. Gothic church architecture was in style in France from the mid-12th to the 16th century. The style began to emerge around 1140 with the construction of the Basilica of Saint-Denis, which we visited previously, near Paris, and it reached its peak during the High Gothic period of the 13th century and included cathedrals like Notre Dame de Paris and Chartres Cathedral. The Gothic style continued to evolve and influence architecture until the Renaissance began to take hold in the 15th century. It staged a significant comeback in the form of neo-Gothic architecture, which is also called Gothic Revival. The style was primarily in vogue from the late 18th century to the mid-19th century, with a peak sometime between 1830 and 1870. That movement emerged as a reaction against neoclassical architecture that dominated the period and reflected a growing interest in medieval history, culture, and aesthetics. The cathedral showcases both Gothic and Gothic Revival features, like the tall front porch, the flying buttresses, the pointed arches, and the stained glass windows, all of which you can see in this Google Earth imagery. This close-up of the main portal highlights the intricate design typical of Gothic architecture, or so I thought. At first glance, it appears to be fairly old, reflecting the era when Gothic art was at its peak. The facade has all the usual Gothic elements like pointed arches, ornate decorations, and a focus on vertical lines, but it's actually Gothic Revival and was only added in the 19th century. Next door to the cathedral is an odd building called St. Peter's Gate, a remnant of the Roman era, which once formed part of the city walls. The gate, while not part of the cathedral, is historically significant. Its architectural style reflects Roman and medieval influences. It was doubtless modernized many times before the wall was torn down, and included sturdy stone construction and a quite functional design, contrasting pretty sharply with ornate Gothic style shown in the cathedral. In the Middle Ages, ecclesiastical or church art was intended to be instructive, since hardly anyone could read, but everyone had been told all the main Bible stories, and I suspect many people would have recognized these figures just at a glance. Today, some of us raised in the Protestant tradition, like me, have a hard time making out what this is supposed to represent. The problem with seeing these things is that you need to know enough to look and have a good enough camera to photograph it, and enough knowledge to understand what you're seeing. Sometimes when I take pictures, it takes me quite a while to figure out the interesting part. And sometimes I miss something absolutely fascinating like this. I could guess Adam and Eve on the right. The apple in Adam's hand gives it away. And then in the center, Noah. The ark gave that part away. But the rest of this was a void, at least in my brain. I had to look it up. What you see here is all drawn from the book of Genesis. You see Adam and Eve. Adam has that danged apple in his paw, perhaps giving Eve a measure of justice after all these millennia. Their son Abel getting ready to sacrifice a sheep. Noah and his ark, along with something really important, at least to the French, grapes for the wine. Abraham getting ready to sacrifice his only son to satisfy a vengeful Old Testament version of God. And a priestly king I never heard of called something like Melchizedek. I know I butchered that, along with some bread and wine. I have no idea who he was or why he was important to this day. Begun back in 1434, it took more than 400 years to build the city's cathedral. Construction continued through the Gothic period and into the Renaissance, but they used the flamboyant Gothic style, which you can see here in the towering groined vault, despite its already being out of fashion, probably because the work had been started and they wanted it to match. Cathedrals, like the Roman law courts or basilicas on which they were built, were the site for significant events. Joan of Arc actually visited Nantes in 1429 as part of her campaign to support Charles VII's claim to the French throne. During her visit, she attended a mass here at the cathedral. The organ shown here actually dates from the 1660s, but it exists now only in memory and photographs because of the most recent fire. The grand organ was more than 400 years old and was still in use. It managed to survive the Reformation, the Revolution, and even World War II bombing and the 1972 fire, but the latest fire in 2020 got it. It, along with the stained glass above it, were destroyed. Nicolas Fouquet, the high-living superintendent of finances for Louis XIV, fled Paris for Nantes after he very foolishly threw an open house for himself to show off his fabulous new chateau, one better than anything the king had. This was a big mistake, enormous. Louis began to suspect that Nicholas had skimmed off more from the taxes than was customary in his role as Minister of Finance, and sent one of his henchmen, the musketeer D'Artagnan, made famous in the Dumas novel, The Three Musketeers, to find, arrest, and drag Nicholas back to Paris. Nicholas was tried and convicted in what we would call a show trial and spent the rest of his life in jail. You can learn about his story and his downfall in an earlier video blog. The link is in the description box below. The highlight of the interior of the cathedral is the tomb of Francois II, the father of Anne of Brittany, along with his second wife, Marguerite of Foix. Anne, who was the last Duchess of Brittany and twice the Queen of France, commissioned the tomb, having access to the finest artists of her time. The tomb was designed by a man named Jean Parial, whom Anne likely met during her first stint of queen at the court of King Charles VIII. She later probably re-met him when she was married to Louis XII. Parial is recognized as one of France's first royal artists, significantly influenced the development of French Renaissance art. The tomb is made up of several pieces of expensive Carrara marble and was created by a sculptor named Michel Coulomb, who was known for his contributions to early Renaissance art as well. An 18th century illustration shown here gives an overhead view of the tomb. Francois and his second wife are shown here in repose, praying, with their heads resting on pillows supported by angels. Marguerite's feet rest on a greyhound, symbolizing fidelity, while Francois's feet are on a lion, representing strength. Statues of the four cardinal virtues, courage, justice, temperance, and prudence, stand at the corner, guarding the entire work. Eventually, Anne's heart would come to be buried in this tomb, but she isn't actually represented here physically, except perhaps in the form of Prudence. Prudence holds a compass in her right hand, symbolizing the far-reaching impact of her action, and a mirror in her left, suggesting the importance of careful thought before acting. The reverse side features the face of an old man, thought to represent wisdom. This tomb was not only the first major Renaissance art in Brittany, but is also a masterpiece of French sculpture. The Nantes have proven themselves to be masters of reinvention. Sometimes their efforts work quite well, other times middling. And in the case of this building, I think the jury is probably still out. This is Le Lieu Unique, a former biscuit or cookie factory. The company was well known for its traditional Breton biscuits, particularly one called Palette Nantes, which are round, buttery cookies made with a blend of ingredients including butter, sugar, and a hint of rum. The biscuit company was a significant part of the local economy and culture and contributed to the culinary heritage of the region. In the early 2000s, however, the company folded and abandoned the factory, which has since been repurposed, taking advantage of the tower and renamed Le Lieu Unique. When I visited, it was not overrun with either shops or customers, but inside there was a bar and a second-hand record store. However, there was no pharmacy or market that might draw customers from a couple of nearby mid-priced hotels, and I suspect COVID really dampened shopping interest in the area. Perhaps better times are coming soon for the place. La Cigale stands as a prime example of how the city continues to evolve, often for the better after having something terrible happen first. I'm rather a fan of brasseries. I like the relaxed atmosphere, the longer hours, and the hearty traditional food served in a casual setting. It's a good place to fill up in the middle of the day without spending a lot of money. They tend to be much less fancy than showier restaurants, and as a woman who travels solo, I find them, especially during lunchtime, far more accommodating than the upscale restaurants that should be vying for my attention and my tourist dollars. La Cigale is now a historic monument. It was designed in an extravagant Art Nouveau style and opened its doors first in 1895. Change doesn't always bring improvement. In 1964, the restaurant was converted into a fast food joint of some variety. La Cigale was a brasserie and not particularly formal, but this shift aimed to attract a new generation of customers, perhaps from the nearby university. The conversion geniuses did not destroy the original decorations because they were not permitted to do so. Instead, they covered them up, although whether drywall or fake wood paneling or something even more distressing, I have never been able to find out. The building's status as a historical monument limited the extent of any remodeling. However, the building did suffer from neglect, the owners went bankrupt, and the building was finally abandoned in the 1970s. In 1982, a new owner restored it to its original brasserie and glory. Today it's absolutely gorgeous, and according to recent reviews, the food is quite good, although of course opinions will always vary on that. Nantes started out, you'll recall, as a settlement in the middle of the river, initially a group of several islands. This is a view of Nantes in the 19th century. Eventually those canals were drained and all the islands were merged together. For most of the 20th century, the city's economic engine sat right here, close to the river and the harbor. It was an industrial area and not really a place where you'd take your kids for a Sunday walk. When deindustrialization hit Nantes in the 70s and 80s, it hit hard. Every factory closed, the shipyard closed, and people left in droves looking for work. The folks left behind wondered what to do with the island and how to save it and the city from disaster. The city formed various partnerships to rehabilitate this space and opted to try to draw modern tech-oriented and related business. One of the leftover buildings was huge and empty. It was a former industrial hangar of some sort that has now been converted into an artistic space and a theater. One of the companies that was drawn here, and which has headquarters in that building, is called Les Machines de Lille. Their product is an enormous mechanical elephant. The elephant has now become the modern symbol of the city. Every leaflet that you see trying to convince you to come to Nantes will have a picture of the elephant on it. I didn't ride on it, but for a modest fee, you can climb aboard and ride while it actually walks around. Kids love this thing, and unless I was deceived, so did their parents. Just north of the river and the island, you'll come across the Place du Buffet. This is the oldest part of the medieval city and quite close to where I stayed during my last visit. The square can be quite lively. There's a large open space where they have political rallies and strikes, at least from time to time. When the French aren't happy about something, you'll find out about it pretty quickly. The square is known for being pretty vibrant and charming and is a popular gathering spot for tourists and locals. It's surrounded with narrow streets with cafes, restaurants, and shops, and more recently hotels, making it an attractive area for visitors. The surrounding buildings are quite attractive, as you can see in this panoramic photo, which sadly is not mine. At the center of the square is an art installation called Les Loges du Pas du Côté, which is part of the city's public art collection. The artwork consists of a series of glass and metal sculptures that were designed to make people think. The title translates to "In Praise of the Sidestep" and reflects the artist's intention to get people to explore different perspectives and interpretations of the space around them. I rather like the man in this photo holding up a political action poster, standing with one foot on a support and the other just on plain air. Historically, this has been an important site since the Middle Ages. Before its redevelopment with the lovely buildings today, it was known as Place du Marché or Place du Marché aux Herbes. The name reflected its historical function as a central market area. The square has long been a center of commerce and social activity, and its name was changed to honor the contributions of a merchant named Francois Buffet. The square features several notable buildings, including some old houses with timber frame facades, like this one. This view, taken from my hotel window, shows how they close off the street for that lively amusement during the evening. I remember being distinctly unamused the next morning when I nearly tripped over a comatose person sleeping it off who must have overindulged during the night. I'm not much of a shopper, but when a shopping mall is listed in a guidebook as a must-see for its architecture, not just for its opportunity to pry money out of me, I have been known to take a look. The Pomeroy Passage is a small mall that dates back to 1854. It was built by a developer named Louis Pomeroy, who rather immodestly named it after himself, and is now considered a National Historical Monument. I happen to think it's gorgeous, but tastes do vary. It's considered, or so my guidebook informed me, to be one of the 5 most beautiful similar malls built in the 19th century, in a style that's called neoclassical eclecticism, which seems to mean a hodgepodge of various styles throughout history, mostly neoclassical, which explains the Greek-looking statues and columns. When you look at it from the inside, it looks a bit like 2 parallel streets, each with shop fronts. The building was pitched up during the Industrial Revolution. Architects of the era were experimenting with new materials and styles, including iron and glass, which you can see here in the glass roof. It was built 3 levels high, as you can see in this Google Earth photo, because it sits on a rather steep slope between streets. And our developer friend Louis, like many a modern developer, went broke building it. More important to me, at least most of the time, is food shopping. I stay when I can in apartment hotels, and in most cases, unless whoever stayed in the room before me was kind and left behind dish soap, toilet paper, and paper towels, I'll have to acquire domestic supplies as well as food. I tend to look for the domestic supplies in local supermarkets, but my main food purchases come from central markets like this one, the Talensac, which sat about a 10-minute walk from my hotel. This is the oldest and biggest market in town, although it only opened up in 1937. The builders retain the outdoor market feel with this shed roof of the area, but the real action is actually inside. It has a nice area to sit and dine, like our modern food courts, and plenty of the usual sorts of shops a hungry diner might want for on-the-spot consumption, or later, like this butcher's shop. I generally try to do at least some of my grocery shopping at the local central market, but if I'm honest, I will stray into French supermarkets on occasion as well, mostly for the convenience factor. This dinner was mostly acquired at the local Monoprix, where I found food on my first day. The salad dressing, which you see in the bottle next to the wine, was actually oil and vinegar, and might seem like an odd choice, but olive oil is generally sold in rather large bottles, which I would have had to have left behind. If you can find one that hasn't been emulsified, which just means treated so it stays blended together, you can always pour off a bit of the oil from the top and use it to saute your meat. My dinner, which included soup, salad with bacon bits, and sauteed pork chops, along with a reasonable bottle of white wine, is shown here on the right. And with dinner at the hotel, we finish off our walking tour of Nantes. I do hope you enjoyed visiting with me. Come back next time and run away with me, the armchair traveler, as your guide.